excuse me. We'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so now we've covered so far yesterday in our examination of the typology of consciousness in the Abhidhamma. So far we have examined the the 12 types of unwholesome consciousness and the 18 rootless types of rootless consciousness. And now we're coming to a broad class of consciousness which is called the beautiful consciousness. The word used here is not wholesome, but beautiful. And we'll see why beautiful is used rather than wholesome. Okay, now the defining mark of a beautiful consciousness or beautiful chittas is the presence of some combination of the beautiful roots. Now, what are the three beautiful roots? We had them yesterday. We have to be very precise. Right, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. Now, the beautiful roots can be present in wholesome consciousness, which is the karmically active consciousness, the states of mind with which one creates wholesome karma. But the beautiful roots are also present in the corresponding results of that wholesome karma, in certain 8 types of consciousness that correspond to those wholesome chittas that create the wholesome karma. So even though on those occasions when one is experiencing the result, One is not creating wholesome karma, but one is experiencing the results of that karma. But in those 8 types of resultant consciousness, some combination of the 3 beautiful roots is present. So those are called rooted consciousness, rooted chittas. They're chittas, states of consciousness that are rooted in some combination of the 3 wholesome roots. Then there are 8 types of sense sphere consciousness that correspond to the 8 types of wholesome consciousness. But these are the types of sense sphere active consciousness that arise in arahants, including the Buddha and other arahants. Now those types of consciousness in the arahants are active, they're not resultant. And so they are very similar to the types of consciousness, to the wholesome types of consciousness, the types of consciousness that create karma, except that arahants do not create any more karma. So these types of consciousness are not called wholesome. Wholesome means a consciousness that is creating wholesome karma. But the arahants are not creating any karma. They will do good deeds. The sense sphere consciousness, they might give discourses on the Dhamma. They might share some of their provisions with other members of the Sangha. They might extend loving kindness and compassion to other living beings. So they're doing this with a sense sphere consciousness which is active in a way very similar to the karmic consciousness, except that because the arahants have eradicated all the defilements, they don't create new karma that will keep them bound in the cycle of birth and death. And so those types of consciousness are not called wholesome consciousness, but they're called kiriya, or functional consciousness. So in the sense sphere, the beautiful consciousness of the sense sphere, we have 24 types of consciousness, 24 chittas. The 8 karmically wholesome consciousness, the 8 kinds of resultant consciousness that correspond to the 8 karmically wholesome consciousness, and the 8 functional consciousnesses of arahants, which are active consciousness, but do not create karma, and therefore they are called functional consciousness. Okay, now I spoke about the beautiful roots, and I said that in these types of consciousness, there's some combination of the beautiful roots. But now the combinations differ. In a beautiful state of consciousness, there are always at least 2 roots present. Which roots will those be? Somebody has to stand up boldly and say, I will speak. No.
You made me say it.
I made you say that. Oh.
Okay, it was a trick question, because I expected people will say non-delusion.
I think it's non-greed and non-hatred because they combined together are non-delusion. Oh,
Because they, what?
when you are filled with non-greed and non-hatred, the likelihood is non-delusion is coming along with it.
Not necessarily.
Okay, wrong too.
You painted legs on the snake. You drew a beautiful snake, but then you thought, I'll paint legs. And then you messed up the picture. Yeah, in the beautiful consciousness, there's always non-greed and non-hatred. There's not necessarily non-delusion. Okay, somebody, for example, mindfully will be maybe brushing his teeth or taking a shower. So he's not necessarily having a clear understanding or clear knowledge of what he's doing. But because he's doing this with mindfulness, so it would be a wholesome state of consciousness. Or people will take a little child, and maybe this happens in what I've experienced in Sri Lanka when the monks are going on alms round. Then the parents will come out, or usually the mother with a little child, maybe 3, 4 years old, and they'll put one of the food items in the hands of the child and say, "Give to the monk, give to the monk." So then the monk will go down with the bowl, and the child will put the food in the bowl. And then the mother will say, "Vandinda," was it Vandinda, Vandinda? That means bow, bow down, bow down. The child will bow down. So the child is doing a good, wholesome deeds. And so they're doing this with wholesome citta, but there's no understanding of what's going on. So there's non-greed, non-hatred in some classes of wholesome consciousness, but not necessarily non-delusion. So when there's non-delusion, then you have what is called a triple-rooted wholesome consciousness, which is a more powerful type of wholesome consciousness. But if there is no understanding, no insight, no knowledge, then you have a double-rooted, two-rooted wholesome consciousness, or a beautiful consciousness. That is a consciousness with non-greed and non-hatred, but not with non-delusion. Okay, now let's take a look at the layout of the wholesome sense of the sense sphere consciousness, of the beautiful sense sphere consciousness. And so this brings us to page 46 in the English version of the manual. It will be section 13 in section 13, so you can find it in the Chinese version. So here we find three, again, just like in the unwholesome greed-rooted consciousness, in the sense sphere wholesome consciousness with the 8 kinds, we find 3 differentiating factors. So one factor, the factor that stands out most clearly from the Pali, is the distinction in the associated feeling. So wholesome sense sphere consciousness occurs associated either with somanassa, that is the joyful feeling, this is the pleasant mental feeling, or it occurs accompanied by what's here translated as equanimity, but I think it's better to translate this as neutral feeling. It's the feeling which is neither pleasant nor painful. Okay, and so we distinguish the sense sphere wholesome consciousness. We have 4 types which are associated with somanassa, with joyful feeling, and 4 types that are associated with upekkha vedana, with neutral feeling. A second differentiating factor is whether or not that state of consciousness is accompanied by knowledge. And so you could say of those associated with joyful feeling, 2 are associated with knowledge, and 2 are dissociated from knowledge. And of the 4 types that are accompanied by neutral feeling, 2 types are associated with knowledge, and 2 types are dissociated from knowledge. And then within each pair, for each pair, there is a distinction between whether they are unprompted and prompted. You remember, unprompted means that the consciousness, the citta, arises naturally, spontaneously, and prompted means that either someone has to persuade one to do it, command one to do it, convince one to do it, induce one with a reward to do it, or one has to deliberate before giving rise to that state of consciousness. And so the consciousness arises as a result of this inner self-induced prompting. Ask the question with the microphone.
The factor of being associated or not associated with knowledge, is that equivalent to what we were just saying, the factor, the
exactly.
absence of the root of delusion or presence of delusion?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, non-delusion and knowledge are regarded as synonymous. So those cittas that are associated with knowledge are considered cittas those cittas that are associated with knowledge are cittas that have 3 roots. The 3rd root is non-delusion. Those cittas that are dissociated from knowledge are cittas that have 2 roots, and what is missing is the root of non-delusion. They have just non-greed and non-hatred. So all the sense sphere wholesome consciousness is rooted in non-greed and non-hatred, but only 4 of them, 4 of the wholesome consciousnesses, are rooted in non-delusion. Now this is a question that used to puzzle me when I started to study Abhidhamma, and even through the years. When it speaks about a state of consciousness being associated with knowledge, how about like a scientist doing experiments, getting knowledge through his experiments, or a historian investigating historical issue, finding out the history of ancient Greece and getting knowledge? Are those to be considered wholesome cittas rooted in knowledge? And if they're not, where do they fit into the Abhidhamma framework? And it seems to me that they aren't cittas, that kind of knowledge is not what is intended here by knowledge. The way the Abhidhamma commentaries explain knowledge, it's understanding things as they really are, which arises from sort of conceptual right view, right understanding of the Dhamma, up to penetrative insight, and up still higher to the world-transcending wisdom. So then the question comes then, where does this kind of objective, scientific, historical, factual knowledge fit in? If I ask somebody, what is your name? And then you say, my name is Neil. Then I know his name is Neil. Is that a wholesome citta? Okay, so the conclusion that I've come to is that the particular typology of consciousness laid out in the Abhidhamma is laid out from a particular standpoint, and that is, you might call, the spiritual aims of the Dharma. So it's the states of consciousness are singled out and put into this order because in order to show what states of consciousness are going to lead to spiritual decay and affliction and misery and suffering, and which kinds of consciousness are going to lead to spiritual happiness, to progress on the path, and to ultimate liberation. And so the question, where do we put factual, historical, scientific, or just everyday factual knowledge? How many pieces of furniture are in the room? How many people are sitting in this room now? Is that a fact? Okay, just those kinds of questions don't fit into the concerns of the Abhidhamma, and so we don't have specific classes of cittas to address that question. Okay, as to the distinction now between the prompted and unprompted cittas, in case this is not clear. Okay, suppose we go back to the case of the monk going on alms round. When he comes to the house and the mother looks out the door, because if she's a devout Buddhist, it's considered a great act of merit to offer alms to a monk on alms round. So she will be very happy, and so she'll think, oh, what kind of food do I have? And then she'll get some food ready and come out, and she will give it very happily, spontaneously to the monk on alms round. But then she'll call a little girl who might be playing with a ball or playing some game, or call out her teenage son who's playing games on the computer and say, come, you also have to do some merit. Ma, I'm playing with these pickup sticks, or I'm playing with I'm playing my computer. And she's like, come, you have to get some merit also. And so then the kid will come out, and then if it's a really little child, the mother will help the child. If it's a teenage boy, the mother will just, give a little prompting. You put it in his bowl. So then he's doing this. Maybe he actually has a domain, a citta associated with hatred. But suppose that while he's giving the gift, suddenly his mind lights up and he's doing it, he's feeling some joy while doing it, or doing it just with a neutral feeling of indifference. In that case, he's doing a wholesome deed with a wholesome citta that's been prompted. Okay, so this is an example of prompting by another. Then, in the case of, internal prompting, we can say that, somebody hears, there's there's an Abhidhamma course at Tuangyan Monastery this weekend. Wow, I always wanted to study the Abhidhamma. This is a good opportunity. Then they sign up. This is an unprompted citta. Yeah, there'll tend to be a correspondence between the feeling with which an action is done and the result that comes from it. But I haven't gotten to resultants yet. So let's just stay with the wholesome citas. Okay, so they hear one person hears, there's a course in Abhidhamma. I have to sign up for it. Actually, one person told me a couple of months ago, he said, just today I saw the notice on the Zhuangyan website that you're giving an Abhidhamma course, and I signed up for it. I saw I was the first person to sign up. And I don't say I'm here. So anyway, so somebody signs up very eagerly. So this is an unprompted citta. But then you're sitting at home. You hear the telephone rings. You pick up the telephone. One of your friends says, "There's an Abhidhamma course at Zhuangyan Monastery over the Labor Day weekend. Would you like to go?" Hang up. Telephone rings again. 2 minutes later. Hello? Your friend says, "We must have gotten accidentally cut off. But there's an Abhidhamma course at Zhuangyan Monastery over the weekend. You want to go?" "Oh, Abhidhamma, that's just too difficult and it's so boring." "No, it'll be really interesting. You come." "Nah, I'll miss the football game." No, this will be, I'm sure you'll find this much more valuable than the football game. You come." "Okay. Yeah, okay, I'll sign up for it." Hangs up. Then a week later, his friend asked him, "Did you sign up for the Abhidhamma course yet?" "Not yet." "No, you better sign up." Then finally, he signs up. Okay, so then he goes to the course a little reluctantly, but while he's there, he starts getting interested. And so this is a case where the wholesome cittas, assuming they're wholesome, not cittas with doubt, cittas with restlessness. This is a case where the wholesome cittas are a result of, again, of prompting. Actually, that's external prompting. But if the person just hears about it and then has to deliberate on his own, then decides to go, that would be internal prompting. Okay, so these are the 8 types of wholesome consciousness of the sense sphere. And now we move on to the 8 types of resultant sense sphere, 8 types of beautiful sense sphere resultant consciousness. And you can see at once that these 8 types of sense sphere wholesome, that these 8 types of beautiful, wholesome resultant consciousness correspond exactly to the 8 types of wholesome consciousness. And as Yoko, is that your name? Okay. I mean, it's easy to remember because of John Lennon's wife, Yoko Ono. Was that Yoko? She was Yoko, right? Said the 8 types of wholesome consciousness they correspond, the 8 types of resultant consciousness correspond to the 8 types of wholesome consciousness. And it's generally the case that one is the result of another, except that there's a certain diminished gradation as to the capacity of the wholesome states of consciousness to produce results. This is actually dealt with in a much later chapter, chapter 5. So I don't want you to get hung up on the details here, it's not so fresh in my memory, but if I remember, it will be the case that the three-rooted consciousness, the consciousness with non-delusion, in order to produce a result with non-delusion, it has to be of a strong quality, a strong three-rooted wholesome consciousness will produce a three-rooted wholesome resultant consciousness. But a weak three-rooted wholesome consciousness will produce a two-rooted resultant consciousness. A strong two-rooted resultant, a strong two-rooted wholesome consciousness will produce a two-rooted resultant consciousness, but a weak two-rooted resultant consciousness will produce a rootless wholesome resultant consciousness. Okay, that's the relationship, but I said you don't have to get hung up on it at this point. Maybe next year when we when we take the later chapters. But an important point to understand is that we call these wholesome, it's just to repeat a point I made yesterday, we call these wholesome resultant consciousness, but it means that these are the results of wholesome consciousness. But karmically, what is the word that we use to describe the resultant consciousness in terms of its karmic quality? Yeah, it's what we call, technically the word used is indeterminate, not determined as either wholesome or unwholesome. Because the result of karma, the words wholesome and unwholesome apply only to the karmic consciousness. The resultant consciousness is reaping the results of the wholesome karma, but it's not karmically wholesome itself.
Neither dark nor bright. Karma? Is it same as neither dark nor bright?
No, that occurs in a different context, and that expression isn't used in the Abhidhamma. Okay. Okay, you could, but still, because for the sake of the recording will pick up with the microphone.
I've wondered this a couple of times. It's about roots. I don't...
It's best to stand up also.
Oh. I haven't noted... I guess one question is, what's the relationship between avidya and moha?
Okay, this is a question that we're going to take up when we come to Chaitasikas, the mental factors, which I think we start this afternoon.
Great.
Okay. Katie.
So I just want to reiterate your point and make sure I understand it. You're saying karma is always indeterminate, but we have a class. I just want to make sure I get your point. Your point is karma is indeterminate?
No. Not at all. My point was just the opposite, that karma, the words wholesome and unwholesome apply to karma. Karma is always wholesome or unwholesome, but it's the resultant chittas that are karmically indeterminate. So we describe these chittas as wholesome resultant, which means not that it's wholesome, but that it is the result of wholesome karma. But the chittas that create karma, the wholesome karma, those are the chittas that create the karma, those are wholesome. The chittas that result are called wholesome resultants, in the sense that they are the results of the wholesome karma. But in their own nature, they are karmically indeterminate or karmically neutral. because they are not creating any karma. Maybe, okay.
So just
if
to
it's-
clarify that for myself,
Okay.
then, would it be right to say that the only chittas that can be unrooted are resultant chittas?
No, there were 3 functional chittas.
Oh, okay. But the wholesome and unwholesome, just by definition, those chittas cannot be unrooted. They have to have a root. That's what makes them wholesome and unwholesome.
Yeah, wholesome and unwholesome
Okay.
chittas always have roots, necessarily have roots.
Okay. Sometimes as you're beginning to understand something later on, you kind of need to backtrack and
Yeah,
clarify
that
it for
is
yourself.
the way, I have to say, because the Abhidhamma, in a way, everything, all of the different parts are so interconnected that when you present it, you have to present it piecemeal, going from section A to section B to section C. But to really get a clear understanding, one has to see A, B, and C not as a linear sequence, but as sort of a circle, each part feeding into the others. Okay, we'll just take Katie with one question, then I want to come to finish up the section. If it's a short, easy question.
It was a short, easy comment to make sure I understood, but I
Okay.
don't.
Okay,
So if
make
I
it
were to
then.
draw 3 statements and 2 arrows, would this be correct? Wholesome chitta leads to wholesome karma. Wholesome karma would lead to wholesome resultant chitta. That chitta itself is not causing any karma. It's indeterminate.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Okay, now we have 8 more types of beautiful sense sphere consciousness, and those are what are called the sense sphere functional consciousness. And when you look at them, what do you notice about them? Yeah, they're exactly the same as the 8 sense sphere wholesome consciousness. So we have similarly 2 kinds of feelings, either joy or neutral feeling, either associated with knowledge or dissociated with knowledge, either prompted or unprompted. But what distinguishes the functional consciousness, as I indicated earlier, is that these are the types of consciousness. They're sense sphere consciousness, they're active consciousness rather than resultants, but they don't create any more karma. And the reason that they don't create wholesome karma is because these are the states of consciousness that arise in arahants, in those who have eradicated greed, hatred, and delusion, and all defilements. Okay, now when we say that they are not wholesome, this means from the karmic standpoint of view, they're not creating wholesome karma. But if we were to rank them ethically, we would say that, this is speaking from the sutta point of view, we would say that they are extremely wholesome states of mind. But in the Abhidhamma terminology, the word wholesome is used in relation to karmically creative states of consciousness. And the states of consciousness in the Arahant don't create any karma, and so we say that they are kiriya, functional, rather than kusala, wholesome. The word means literally simply activity, but I'm translating here as function, functional. But there's quite a difference. We saw yesterday 3 kinds of rootless functional consciousness, and these 8 kinds of beautiful functional consciousness. Of the 3 kinds of rootless functional consciousnesses, the 2, 5-door adverting consciousness, the consciousness that listens to hear who is knocking on one of the 5 sense doors. Is it a form at the eye, a sound at the ear, and so on? That's the 5-door adverting consciousness. The mind door adverting consciousness, the consciousness that turns to an inner object that's occurring within the mind process. So those two are just performing what I call very primitive, elementary functions that takes place in everybody. It's just part of the necessary sequences of consciousness for any little infant whose mind is aroused by a sense object. There'll be a 5 sense door consciousness, and when even the little infant is thinking, there'll be a mind door consciousness. The third one is the smiling consciousness of arhats. That's a bit of a puzzle to me. But those seem to be rather weak and very elementary types of consciousness. But these 8 are called beautiful consciousness because they have beautiful roots, and these types of consciousness occur only in fully enlightened, fully liberated beings, in those who have reached liberation in this life. And it's not the case that the Arahant is always remaining absorbed in nirvanic bliss, but the Arahant, even the Buddha, gets up in the morning, washes his body, his face, brushes his teeth, and he'll put on his clothing, his robes. They'll go on alms round, eat meals. In the afternoon, maybe they'll take a little rest. They'll engage in activities, walking to the village, coming back. Maybe one Arahant is in charge of maintaining the storeroom at the monastery. Another Arhat might be the greeter of guests to the monastery. So they have many activities that they have to engage in. And so when they're engaging in these activities, these kinds of chittas will be arising. So they have the 8 functional chittas of the sense sphere. Okay, now we cover the 24 beautiful chittas of the sense sphere. Then there's one little verse which sums up the sense sphere beautiful consciousness by showing how we obtain the 8. It says, Vedana Jnana Sankara Bedena Chatuvisati Sahetu Kama Vachara Punyapaka Kriya Mata. So translated, this means that, I'll translate closer to the Pali, by classification according to feeling, according to knowledge, and according to prompting, the sense sphere consciousness with roots, which is understood as wholesome, resultant, and functional, becomes 24. So we have the 3 sets of 8, wholesome, resultant, functional, and each set is divided by way of the feeling, whether joyful or neutral, whether with knowledge or without knowledge, and whether prompted or unprompted. Okay, so that takes care of the 24. And now we'll just take some questions if there are any questions. Okay, so the first one to have the hand up was Mahindra.
I'm going to come back to the dark and bright. So we have this many consciousness. Wholesome would give rise to bright karma.
Yeah.
Unwholesome will give rise to dark karma.
Yeah.
The functional would give rise to neither dark nor bright. And so what is the counterpart for dark and bright?
You see, dark and bright is not a single type of karma, but dark and bright is used to describe the behavior of somebody who engages sometimes in wholesome karma, sometimes in unwholesome karma. And so the two are pretty much, the person vacillates between the two. Okay, we'll go down, we'll take Maureen and Chi, and then we take Yoko.
So the sense sphere functional consciousnesses that are dissociated from knowledge, obviously the arahants aren't devoid of wisdom. So I've heard the example, or one teacher taught the example, like, let's say an arahant's taking care of a sick monk and spontaneously...
And what?
Is taking care of a sick monk and spontaneously, as he's doing so, he contemplates the four elements.
Yeah.
And then that would be associated with knowledge.
Yeah.
But if he wasn't contemplating the four elements, it would be the dissociated from knowledge.
Yeah, yeah.
But it seems to me like aren't they always contemplating the three characteristics on some level? I mean,
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so. I don't think that's always being done.
Okay.
If the need to reflect on the three characteristics come up, they will do so. But I would imagine that, say, if the arhat is just walking to the village, because he doesn't have, you see, if it's somebody in training, he might be contemplating the three characteristics all the time in order to build up the momentum of the practice to make a breakthrough. But if it's an arhat, he's already completed all of his work, so he might just be walking mindfully, but without focusing on contemplating for insight. And so I would say that those types of chittas will be dissociated from knowledge. And particularly when going about, maybe if he's walking to the village, if it's a long way, then he'll keep the mind tracked on the impermanence with each step. But maybe if he's just brushing his teeth or taking a bath, he doesn't have to be observing the impermanence of the sensation of the toothbrush against the teeth, or the impermanence of the cool sensation of the water hitting the body. Okay, Chi?
Monday, in this Abhidhamma, what's the difference between neutral and equanimity? Yeah, because in the functional consciousness in Arahat, is that possible? Is equanimity instead of neutral?
Yeah, as I said yesterday, I think it was misleading to translate upekkha here as equanimity in the sense of the balanced state of mind. Here, upekkha means just neutral feeling.
Even for arahat in the functional consciousness?
No, there will be equanimity in the higher sense, but what is meant, and we're going to come to this later, when we come to the states, to the mental factors in the different states of consciousness. But what is meant here by being accompanied by equanimity is simply being accompanied by neutral feeling.
Even for arahat, enlightenment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question is in the wholesome chitta, the resultant chitta, even though it's indeterminate in terms of karmatic force, but won't it actually create the preconditions to create a karmatic, the good karma?
Wait, I think it's better you stand up and project your voice.
Sorry.
Yeah.
In the eight wholesome resultant chitta, even though it's indeterminate.
It's karmically indeterminate.
Yeah, but won't it actually possible to create the conditions, to create a favorable conditions for the good karma?
I think that would be the case.
Okay.
I think that would be the case. I'm going to come to the functions of the consciousnesses after we finish taking the tour of consciousness. Okay, we'll take one more question, then we'll take a 10-minute break. Okay. But we're having a question and answer session tonight also, so other questions that you don't get a chance to ask during the day, you write them down.
My question goes back to the functionals.
To the
functional chitta.
Functional, yeah.
Functional chittas, yeah. You were explaining that is a case of the arahants, right?
Yeah.
So can we, let's say, if it's not the arahant, can it be like a regular example of a regular person? Let's say someone who just, because of doing his or her work,
yeah,
doesn't mean that it's going to create any kind of karma. The example of a parent whose work is to take care of their kids in a nice way, but it doesn't mean because he or she is doing that creates karma. Is that the case?
Okay, this is a very good question, actually. And it's something that used to puzzle me. And I think this is a point on which, there's a difference between people who take what I would call a rather doctrinal understanding of the Abhidhamma and those who take a more pragmatic or, quotation marks, functional understanding of the Abhidhamma. So if one takes a very strict doctrinal understanding of the Abhidhamma, then they would say that the Abhidhamma is giving us a complete map of every type of citta possible. So in every activity, even in subtle ways, one has to be creating either wholesome or unwholesome karma. So if I'm just taking a walk around Zhuangyan Monastery, not particularly mindful, but I'm not giving rise to any unwholesome thoughts, well, at some level, I'm either creating wholesome karma or unwholesome karma. And it used to strike me as rather puzzling. I don't think I'm creating any wholesome karma or unwholesome karma. But then my doctrinaire teachers will say, aha, you really are. It's just very subtle, but you don't see it. You don't know what it is. If you're not really being mindful and not contemplating some Dhamma theme, then you must be creating unwholesome karma with maybe a restless mind, or it's a subtle kind of greed or aversion. Be more mindful and you'll see that subtle karma that you're creating. I tried to be more mindful, but I just didn't think I was creating karma. Maybe it's my own stupidity and delusion. But the conclusion that I came to is that, you see, what I discovered, it seems that the canonical Abhidhamma, the Abhidhamma that we find in the Dhamma Sangani from the original Abhidhamma, doesn't seem to be setting up a complete map of all possible states of consciousness, but it just speaks of, on such and such an occasion, when this type of consciousness arises, there is present, then it will enumerate all of the other factors that are present on that occasion of consciousness. So the canonical Abhidhamma doesn't seem to be setting up a complete catalog of every type of consciousness, but is describing what I would say keeps my saliva brings up some saliva. Yeah, so the canonical Abhidhamma seems to be describing just the states of consciousness that have some significance from the standpoint of Buddhist spiritual practice and for understanding how the process of consciousness works. But we don't have to take it as being an all-comprehensive catalog, like every kind of consciousness that's possible. So in that case, well, if the mother is taking care of the child, I would say in that case, there'll be a consciousness generally with loving kindness, so it will be a wholesome sense sphere consciousness. But just take the case of a much more neutral case of, well, just taking a walk down the street, getting on the subway to go to work if it's not too crowded so you don't get angry or upset, or any of the little activities of day-to-day life. You know, I don't see them as being particularly wholesome or unwholesome, but they wouldn't be the functional consciousness of the arhat. So just say that the types of consciousness which are maybe don't fit into the Abhidhammic framework of understanding. Okay, let us take a 15-minute break so we come back 10:15, but I'm going to start speaking exactly at 10:15.